Hello and welcome to CapCityBTC, Sacramento's premier Bitcoin and cryptocurrency group serving Northern California. Enjoy the presentation.
We're going to continue to do these virtual events for the foreseeable future. This event is in collaboration with a few different meetup groups, Starfish SF, SF Bitcoin and Blockchain Social, as well as Sacramento Bitcoin Meetup. We're hoping to include some more meetup groups throughout California as well as across the US, pull together and see if we can continue these virtual events while we can't do in-person events. We'll see if that changes when we can go back to meeting in person. Today's event is specifically special because a lot of times we get technical speakers who go into details about the technical makeup of a cryptocurrency or the blockchain or some other part of Web3. Today we have a speaker who emphasizes mental models and systems thinking, which I think is so exciting to hear. So I'm really excited for our speaker. However, before we get to our main speaker, we do have some insights from the CEO of BitAml. He is an expert on all things crypto compliance and anti-money laundering and KYC. Everybody, please give up a virtual applause for Joe Ciccolo.
Woo! All right, thanks, Javon. I feel it's always downhill from here after the introduction. Hey everybody, for those I haven't met, I'm Joe Ciccolo, founder and president of BitAml. Our company provides regulatory compliance consulting solutions for the crypto space, and as well as traditional financial institutions interested in working with the crypto space, few that they may be. Quick update on some of the goings on around here. So you probably heard about what happened with BitMEX. Many of the executives arrested and will be charged with various crimes related to violations of the Bank Secrecy Act. So that was a case that, as my understanding, has been going on for some time, that there was some sort of longer term investigation. Word has it that even those involved were often approached by the government and told to maybe clean up their act, or that they could maybe do some things to come into compliance. As it appears, they did not, or allegedly did not, and are finding themselves facing significant time in jail for not adhering to the Bank Secrecy Act. And in particular, one note I found interesting, according to some media reports, they didn't file a single SAR, or suspicious activity report. So for an exchange, that is unheard of. And so they're based in the Seychelles, and they had some other pieces of information that would lead you to believe that they had some issues there and were putting themselves not as in a positive light as they could be. So definitely something to keep an eye on. I don't know that it is, the first of many exchanges to go down. I heard some reports about that. I think that's nonsense. It's a case-by-case basis. And it seems like these guys, from all outward appearances, flouted rules and didn't really take the opportunity to mend their ways and perhaps come into compliance. If in fact that was true, I don't know. They could have come back into compliance. But interesting case, definitely want to follow that. Want to quickly talk about the DOJ, Department of Justice, the federal level here in the United States, issued an 83-page report following up on their crypto task force that they put together to look into the ways that crypto is used in future enforcement opportunities, law enforcement, access, that sort of thing. 83 pages long, very, very detailed and robust. Don't know where to begin. I mean, there's so many different things I could pull out of this. Just based on some interests within this group and some things I've heard earlier, they definitely mentioned DeFi and wanting to look into that space and developing tools. So usually when the government says that, they kind of forecast, or at least regulators do this, they sort of forecast what they're going to do. And if they say something now, usually 6 months later, something is going to play out. So I definitely look for some sort of activity from regulators and from law enforcement in the DeFi space. What that looks like and how it plays out, I don't know, but that's definitely something to keep an eye on. Other elements of the report, it's sort of any way that crypto has ever been used for a financial crime seem to be in that report. This is coming from law enforcement, right? So, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So they didn't really talk about any sort of legitimate use cases, although there were some overtures of this is vital that we learn. This is kind of the future of financial services, and we ought to be cognizant about innovation and things like that, which is usually what regulators say before they then say we're going to enforce something or go after something. So it's always interesting in the way that's teed up. But 83 pages long, again, super deep dive if you guys want to read into it. One other point, because there's some conversation ahead of time, before this meeting at least, about privacy coins, so-called zero proof, zero knowledge coins. Those were mentioned in the report, and I have to give a hat tip to Coin Center for actually bringing this up. I think it was Jerry Brito in his tweets that follow the report. Basically, the government, as I understand it, has said that you can't technically be compliant with the Bank Secrecy Act if you are doing something with a zero knowledge coin like a Monero or Zcash, just to use examples, because of their inherent nature of property. Jerry appeared to be publicly in disagreement with that. I disagree with that because there are ways that you can properly do AML and BSA, but to me that suggests probably some pressure on exchanges to de-risk or delist privacy coins. So I'm not saying that's going to happen. I can't predict the future, but government as it is usually looks for choke points. And so I wonder, just speculating here, I wonder if that's going to be the case, and we'll start to see some of the exchanges being pressured by their regulator, because they have to answer regulators themselves, if they won't start to de-risk some of the more privacy-centric or privacy-focused coins in response to that, and maybe focus on sort of the Bitcoins, Ethereums, like coins, and sort of the more mainstream, if that's a word in crypto, mainstream coins that are out there, as opposed to some of the privacy coins. So anyway, it's 83 pages. If you want to read it, or if you have any questions about it, or any other crypto compliance related questions, I'm always happy to help. And yeah, as I turn it back over, I'll find a way to share my information here in the chat log. So if folks want to follow up with me, they're more than welcome to.
Can we add your Twitter link in the chat?
Of course. I'll get on that right now.
I was going to look for it, but if you could add it in there, that'd be awesome. If anybody has any more questions for Joe, his email is going to be in the chat in just a second, and his Twitter will be there. He's been super helpful and super friendly on all things, compliance and regulations. I highly suggest reaching out to him for all the things, even if you just have a casual question. Thank you, Joe. Everyone's muted, so you can never hear the claps, but I still like to do it anyway. Brian,
I hope they're there.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Joe. Thank you, Gibran. I got a message on my LinkedIn from somebody that said, hey, I have a great book on Bitcoin. Check it out. And I was like, I will do that. And I got the book in the mail, and it is called Bitcoin Clarity, a Guide to Understanding. And it has a picture of I don't know how pixelated my video is, but it's a half clear, half pixelated tulip, and that is the picture there. And as soon as I got the book, I read it. I really enjoyed it, and I invited the speaker to come chat with us and kind of draw out some of the main points of the book. I don't code personally, but I've kind of found this book to talk everything and really clarify Bitcoin for all the way up until you get to the code. And obviously cryptocurrency is very confusing. It's hard to wrap your mind around. And this book really did a good job encapsulating all of that. And so we invited our speaker here. And without further ado, she has a great slideshow for us. So let's give it up for Kiara Bickers.
Hey guys, and thanks for that intro. Yeah, I think the goal that I had in mind when I was writing the book was really to get people to the level of understanding opcodes, which, for people who don't know, opcodes, it's basically Bitcoin's programming language is loosely based off like an old school 70s programming language called Forth. So without knowing how to code, I wanted to get people to that level of understanding because it's the opcodes that create the transaction types in Bitcoin. Address types too, so it's kind of the same thing there. But yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen and I'll talk a little bit about more how I think about Bitcoin and why I think it was actually really helpful to people who are both technical but not cryptographers. Let's see. Share, presenters view. Okay, and because it's such a small group, if you guys just want to like say anything or interrupt me, like feel totally free to do that. I think we have a little bit of time to go through this, but I don't know how long my slides will last. I could probably drag it out even longer, but we'll see how it goes, okay? All right, so again, my name's Kiara. A little bit of background for how I got to like writing this book. I work at a company called Blockstream. I don't know how many people have heard of this company, but basically early on, early on is sort of relative, isn't it? Back in like 2015, 2016, Blockstream was one of the companies that was hiring a lot of the core devs. At the time, core devs weren't really paid to do development work on Bitcoin. It's an open source project. So it made sense at the time to sort of hire a lot of these core devs. And, fast forwarding to now, a lot of them don't work at the company anymore. But what I learned from working at this company was how core devs think and how different it was from my understanding of Bitcoin. I came into Bitcoin from a very economic view. I was, Austrian economist type person. I was reading all these books on, Ludwig von Mises and all kinds of stuff like that. I was listening to Mises podcasts back and forth in my car. I lived in California. I would commute to Stanford every day working there. And it was like an hour to work, an hour back. I just listened to economics podcasts. I got super interested. I wanted to learn more about Bitcoin when that came on my path in like 2012. And everyone was telling me that I should learn how to code to learn more about Bitcoin. And I think that was a little bit of a misstep. I'm glad that I learned to code to some small degree, but for anyone who is a developer, you'll know that, like, you know, spending a couple years learning C++ or some like programming language doesn't make you an expert in cryptography. It certainly doesn't make you like a master programmer. So I was still sort of crippled. I spent all this time learning how to code. I go and I look at the source code of Bitcoin, and I still didn't understand how any of it worked. I managed to get a job at Blockstream working in IT. And it was really at this company, just getting lunch with the developers over and over and over again, that I was starting to see how how to describe this as a system rather as like digital gold or this like purely libertarian lens. So yeah, I got the idea for Bitcoin Clarity when I was hanging out with some of these core devs in Australia. And I think the biggest value of the book is really the layout of it. I wanted to put things in such a sequential order, and I can talk a little bit about that. I'm trying to unfold this slowly here, but basically what I see happening, and this is what happened to me when I wanted to learn more about Bitcoin, I think that a lot of the books fall into these two categories. So they're either overly technical or they're overly dramatized. What I mean by that is, like, you know, you can pick up a book that's supposedly Bitcoiners, like supposedly a book for Bitcoiners and programmers, but it's like, how do I put this? Because I don't want to badmouth any book in particular. Basically, there are a lot of ways to describe Bitcoin, but when you do it in a very technical way, there's a tendency to go way too far, right? So like a lot of the books will do things like showing you how private keys can be converted into binary, which is like super not helpful. Talking about specific bugs that have been in Bitcoin, have been in the code, or will even include code snippets. I think like a better example is how most of these like technical style books on Bitcoin, it doesn't even have to be books, right? It could be blog posts. Well, more often than not, try and explain all of cryptography to you, or all of cryptography that they think is relevant. So what I tried to do is really just give you the bare minimum amount of knowledge to understand what the cryptography is doing, why it's needed, and why it's used in this particular way in this part of the system. And then I move on from it without going too far. The other category that I have here is this overly dramatized. I think this sort of thing is like, I categorize this more like Bitcoin Twitter in my mind. It's like everything is just hype, 24/7 hype. And, you know, there's no technical whatsoever. And it's just talking about how Bitcoin is digital gold, and, you know, how the dollar's going to be worthless and everything's going to be denominated in Bitcoin. And like, while that's very entertaining, I think that turns off a lot of very reasonable people, because it makes it easier to dismiss the whole industry as a bubble, right? Because it's not balanced at all. So what I wanted to do is give a book that really gave you the mental models to understand Bitcoin at the level that the developers understand it, or as close as we can get to it without being those developers and downloading the contents of their brain ourselves. But also, you know, you have the reader come to their own conclusions about the hype, right? It's better for you to come to those same conclusions without being told what I think Bitcoin should be worth. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to get into more specific examples as we go along, but this is just kind of how I was thinking about Bitcoin at the time when I was first learning about it. And, you know, to put some timestamps on these things, I spent like a couple years studying economic stuff after college and high school, and a couple years learning how to code, and none of that was actually helpful in understanding Bitcoin as a system. So that was like a 3-year time period before I started working in the industry, and that's when my understanding really leveled up. So this was one of, like, once I heard this mental model, this blockchain as a time chain, I knew that this would be the way that I wanted to frame the book. And this is what I'll talk about later in the presentation. I originally wanted to call the book Bitcoin, the Value of Beauty, but I thought that was a little too meta for most people. I'll explain why the time chain is more accurately, I'll explain why the blockchain is more accurately described as a time chain. But what I did before writing the book is I made this as a blog post to just see if there was traction around this, and this ended up becoming my most popular blog post. I was like, okay, cool. Like, people haven't heard this, people are interested in it. One of the things that's interesting too is that before the blockchain was ever called the blockchain, because it wasn't in the original Bitcoin white paper, it was called a time chain in the original Bitcoin source code. So when I was told to learn how to code to understand Bitcoin, I had looked at what is the current living version of the Bitcoin source code, which is very complex and hard to understand. But if you Google original Bitcoin source code, there's a much simpler version, which was like a leaked, you know, V001 or whatever, like version of Bitcoin. And in the comments of the code, there was like Satoshi himself was describing this like system as a time chain. So that's what I make. I think it's the second chapter of the book. Okay, so more about how I lay out the book. I try to focus on really what's useful to the reader and what was useful for me in learning about Bitcoin. So this is the way I think about information. Okay, so this is a hierarchy of information, and it's like at the bottom we have data / information. In the middle we have knowledge, and at the top we have understanding, right? So every question that we ask, who, what, when, where, why, how, all of these questions produce different levels in this sort of like knowledge hierarchy. At the bottom, if you ask who, what, when, where, that just gets you data, right? That's just taking raw data and trying to process it into useful information. When you ask how questions, really what that gets you is what we would typically call knowledge. The idea of asking how do I do this? How do I do that? How do I get from point A to point B? When you're asking how questions, you're implicitly asking to produce a skill. You want to know, you want to learn a skill, right? But not everything about, when you're learning something, not everything is with the goal of having a skill, right? And Bitcoin is such a good example because like when I wanted to learn about Bitcoin, I don't really think there was a skill that I was trying to pick up, right? I was just trying to understand it. So I should have asked like why Bitcoin, but then the problem with that is that it ended up being all economic. Okay, so hopefully this makes sense. We'll get to the top of the hierarchy here, but when you ask why questions, the goal of that is to explain desire, and we call that understanding. I think just because Bitcoin is such a complicated system, or I shouldn't say complicated, but complex, we just need to ask all of these questions in a particular order in order to sort this out and make sense of the complete system instead of just an isolated viewpoint of it. Instead of just becoming, you know, like purely libertarian or purely economic in thinking, or thinking about purely the hype in the media cycle, or even so people get pigeonholed in even just thinking about the legal aspects. Certainly the price hype is something that people will just solely focus on. I want people to understand the complete system, especially because this is an industry that's evolving. And when I decided to take up the task of writing this book, one of the things that was bothering me at the time is like, we're having all these advanced discussions on future cryptocurrencies, but people don't understand like the basic one, right? People have they don't have a very high resolution view of Bitcoin itself. So how is it possible to talk about more complex systems if we don't even understand the most simple one? Okay, talking about this hierarchy a little bit more. One of the patterns that's interesting here is that when you go down the hierarchy, you end up talking in terms that are more concrete. And as you go up the hierarchy, you end up talking about things in a more abstract way. It becomes very apparent when you're trying to talk about even something like Bitcoin mining, how abstract it is, because it's very difficult to do that just verbally. I think with things that are extremely abstract, you need more visualizations in order to help you understand how that system actually works. Okay, so this is how I solve the problem of things being either overly technical or overly dramatized, right? Over focus on hype. I discovered this from a guy whose name escapes me right now, which is terrible. Russell Adcroft, that's his name. And basically this is the mental model of systems thinking. He says there's analytical thinking and there's synthetic thinking. And I'm gonna go into each one of those because, yeah, I'm gonna go into each one of those right now. All right, so analytical thinking focuses you on the parts of the system and their functions. Analytical thinking occurs in 3 steps. So if we have a system that we're interested in, right? Analytical thinking would tell us in order to understand that system, we should break it apart and then study each of the parts taken separately, right? And then once you understand each of the parts taken separately, then you understand the system. And this, it blows my mind to think how much of society is actually organized through this analytical way of thinking. When I was thinking about studying computer science in university, I looked at a lot of the curriculum, and what you'll notice, I mean, this is true for any subject, not just computer science, but it's like the way they teach computer science in every university is this analytical way of thinking. You know, you learn like compiler design and gosh, I don't know. I didn't actually end up going to university to study this, so Lord knows what the curriculum is, but you learn every single thing separately. You learn algorithms separately. And then the thought is that if you understand all these parts, then you can assemble that into understanding the system. I think there are limitations to this way of thinking. All right, so comparing that to Bitcoin. In Bitcoin, you'll see like a lot of the explanations of Bitcoin work like this, right? We take Bitcoin as a system and then we break it up into the parts. You have miners, you have full nodes, you have clients. That is actually less helpful than you would think. And one of the ways to really prove how not helpful this is if people are having a hard time understanding Bitcoin, given the amount of resources that exist on Bitcoin, it's probably because there's a deficiency in the resources, right? And all of the resources structure the material in this exact same way, at least the ones that are attempting to be analytical. And it's just not helpful for the people who have read every single book on Bitcoin and still don't get it. Obviously, technical people are going to understand at that point. All right, so synthetic thinking is more of a big picture thinking. It focuses on the purpose and the function of the whole system. Synthetic thinking also occurs in 3 steps. So if we have a system we're trying to understand, the first step in this way of thinking is to go into the containing system. So it's very reasonable to study Bitcoin with the lens of economics, because economics would be the larger containing system, right? But there's many larger containing systems. Anyway, there's many larger containing systems, not just economics. So the second step is to understand the role of that containing system, to go back to the system you were trying to understand, and then look at the functions. So let's see, to understand the interactions between each of the systems in the larger containing system. Let's see if I provide an example here. I don't think I do, but I'm trying to think if I can provide an example on the fly, but I think I'm just going to skip that for now. So the idea is that analytical thinking breaks things up and goes inside of the system to explain it, while synthetic thinking goes outside of the system, looks at the functions instead of the parts. So when I explain full nodes, for example, I lead with the function of the full nodes instead of the part of it. When I explain mining, you lead with the function. So like, what is doing validation? Why do you need validation? What is doing propagation? Why do you need propagation? What is proof of work, not just as like a buzzword, but broken down into the functions, right? Instead of just saying like, well, miners do proof of work. Well, what the fuck does that mean, right? It's like, what is proof of work and what is the point of proof of work? All right. So when you combine these 2 ways of thinking, you get systems thinking, and that's how I structure the book. Okay, let's see. So this is a layout of the chapters. So the first 2 chapters are conceptual reframing, like why people don't typically understand Bitcoin. Then I talk about the time chain, which is the first mental model that we can use as a basis for understanding. The second part of the book is analytical thinking. So it's my belief that you do actually need to go inside of the system before you can kind of understand. Like, you need to ask how before you can ask why. If you only ask why questions, I think it can be kind of hard to believe like how this like crypto funny, like how Bitcoin even works. All right, so analytical thinking, I go into UTXOs, transactions, blocks, nodes, mining, smart contracts. But really what I'm saying here is I go into the transfer of value, right? Like, that's what a UTXO is: a store of value. A transaction is a transfer of value. A block is the propagation of value. The nodes are the means by which we propagate value. The mining, well, it's a little bit more complicated. I can't just say it in a single sentence. And then the last one I do is smart contracts, which is, I think of it as the locking and unlocking layer of the UTXOs, or of the value on the blockchain. I don't want to use too many of these words that maybe some people aren't familiar with, but given what you guys have said about your background, it sounds like most of you are. Okay, so synthetic thinking, I go into mindset, markets, and kind of like the bigger picture aspects of the system, the containing systems. I also talk about the emergent properties. Okay, I'll build to that in a second. All right, so this is one of the images from the book. So before I can talk about emergent properties, I sort of want to give an example of what I mean by that. So let's take a step back. Bitcoin is a system. Like a car is a system, like your body is a system. Systems have emergent properties that you don't find in any of the individual parts, right? And this is what frames the next section of the book. So using your body as an example, right? You're made out of cells that make up tissue, that make up your organs, that make up the systems of your organs, which in this case is a cardiovascular system, that make up you as a human, right? And the emergent property of you, we could say, is life, but probably more correctly, we could say consciousness, right? So there's this unique property of you as a system that isn't inherent to any of the prior parts. Comparing that to Bitcoin visually, and I think the visual part of that is really important. We have Bitcoins, which are the UTXOs that are transferred in inputs and outputs, that are grouped together in blocks, right? And once you have the understanding of the time chain, we'll learn why it's important to group them together in blocks. And then you have this system of full nodes and miners that regulate the regularity of blocks, the consistent producing of blocks that creates the time chain. And the emergent property of that is decentralization. And, you know, I couldn't hit this point harder, but I think the real purpose of the blockchain is always decentralization and censorship resistance. And a really good indicator that people don't understand this is how many blockchains have you heard of that aren't decentralized and don't produce censorship resistance? It seems to me a little silly to be building to be using this system for things that don't serve that end, because there's a lot cheaper ways to do that. Okay, that was a bit of a tangent. I'm going to try and not tangent, otherwise I'll never stop. All right, so the final section of the book is properties of the system, where I talk about decentralization, I talk about governance. So that includes, I use the mental model of a democratic republic, and then I compare that to how you make code changes in Bitcoin, or what you would loosely refer to as the governance system in Bitcoin. I talk about the emergent properties of privacy and fungibility. I talk about the properties of money, and how we can compare, the historic properties of money to the modern properties of a cryptocurrency, or Bitcoin specifically. Talking a little bit more about the process of writing the book, I actually sketched all this stuff out onto note cards, because I wanted each illustration to be unique and not just be a copy of a developer diagram. And then I went to my local coffee shop, and I liked the art on the wall, so I had the artist illustrate the whole book, which I think went very well. I'm really happy with the illustrations. All right, let's see, what time is it? Do I have time to keep going? Okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to do a little rant on the time chain, which I'm taking illustrations from the book, and then I'm going to show you exactly what I mean by mental model, so it's a little less abstract for you. All right, so it's not something that's super obvious, but I think a reasonable question to ask when you're looking at a blockchain is, why do we have blocks at all? And maybe this is a little bit technical, but I think it'll take us a long way, so go with me on this. Why do we have blocks at all, right? And why not just have a ledger of transactions that are all ordered one by one by one by one, right? And it's an interesting question, and when you think about it, it's really difficult to come up with an answer, right? You have to go back to what original cypherpunks were trying to solve. So maybe we won't go back that far, but I'll just I'll just explain it here. Let's see, did I lay this out? Okay, so yeah, so the question that I'm asking is, why are transactions grouped together in blocks, right? Because from a user's perspective, I don't think most people ask this question, but if you're going to look at a block explorer, you will see that your transaction exists in a block, and the block is timestamped. And I don't know how to phrase this. So it's something that people just sort of take for granted. Like, why does every blockchain have blocks? Hopefully I can explain this. I think my slides went in a weird order here. So a full node is a server that propagates. Okay, so what I'm trying to explain here is the way cypherpunks were thinking about this. So a full node is a server that, 1, validates transactions and blocks on the network, 2, propagates the transactions in the network, and 3, keeps a full record, or partially full record of the Bitcoin ledger via the blockchain. I think most people understand this. There's no mystery about this. The image that is here is showing you sending making a transaction, and it's getting propagated through this network of blockchains. And the purpose of this network of blockchains is to stop that double spend from happening, right? And the double spend the double spend problem, to give a little bit of context, is why we didn't have cryptocurrency sooner. So when people were trying to develop cryptocurrency, they said, well, we can't do it because of this double spend problem. It's very difficult to solve this double spend problem. So instead, we'll just put a middleman in between all of the payment. We'll put a middleman in between, you and every person you're trying to make a payment with, in order to make sure that payments are only being done once. It's kind of a roundabout way of explaining this, but hopefully that made sense to you guys. Because it takes time for data to travel from one server in one part of the world to a server in another part, nodes closer together will see transactions originating from their local area as having occurred before the transactions on the opposite side of the world. Okay, so the point that I'm making here is that, and maybe it's better for me to just explain it casually instead of reading the slide, but the point that I'm making here is that if I were to make a transaction, say I'm like node A here, if I make a transaction at the exact same time as the person who's, let's see, person B on the other side of the world, and we were all running full nodes, so we can validate our own transactions and all that good nerdy stuff. If we both make transactions at almost exactly the same time, the problem with having a ledger without blocks is that B and C will see, B and C will see, geez. B and C will see B's transaction as having occurred first, or before A's, before mine. So again, to hash it out without in like more casual terminology here, I'm saying the order of the ledger is the most important thing, and it's very difficult to actually have an ordered ledger, meaning like timestamps, in a network that is decentralized. So this is what cryptographers and cypherpunks thought, this is why they thought it was actually impossible. So one of the founders of Blockstream, his name was Greg Maxwell, he's a great Bitcoin Core developer, like probably one of the best Bitcoin developers in my opinion. And he worked for Wikipedia, and they're like, hey, can we make Wikipedia decentralized? Because that would be something that would be, you know, actually interesting to do. And he believed that it was impossible because of this problem. Well, it's like, it's more complicated, but this is like a simple version of the problem. Basically, there's no way to determine time in a decentralized network. And the blockchain solved that by instituting blocks. Okay, so I'm kind of getting ahead of myself with these slides, but the idea is the block acts as a tick in this decentralized clock. So when you group transactions together, then it means that, let's say I create a transaction and B creates a transaction at the same time. Instead of saying, well, A happened first and B happened second, or B happened first and B happened second, we say they all just happened at roughly the same time, and we're going to put them in a block. Jeez, the terminology here. We're going to put them in a block, and they'll both have the exact same timestamp, right? So going back to this slide, transactions aren't timestamped individually. When you look in a block explorer, it's the block that's timestamped. And then you just find your transaction that was confirmed in a block. So already we've discovered, like, what is the purpose of a block? The purpose of a block is to finalize transactions. Yes, that's true. But the reason why it's in a block, like the reason why it has to be finalized in a block, is because that's the only way to establish a consensus around time. Right? And once you have a consensus around time, then, you know, we can have this like really nice thing and call it a blockchain. Again, I said this already, you know, you can think of the block as this tick in this decentralized clock, which confirms transactions roughly every 10 minutes. And to maybe stretch this mental model a little bit further, and again, I think I do it better in writing than I do verbally, because it's a little bit harder to step through all these things verbally, is we can talk a little bit about mining and talk about how this clock actually regulates time, right? So like right now we understand, yeah, like, okay, the block is the tick in the clock, but how does the clock tick, right? What's the engine behind the clock? Well, the engine is the mining. And the way that it regulates itself with time is through proof of work. Now it's, when you think about other clocks, right, like a quartz crystal, like vibrates, you always have to have some sort of frequency reference. And that frequency reference is usually generated by, you know, some sort of energy, right? So it's hard to imagine how the blockchain does this in a decentralized way. It's really hard to imagine. And when I figured this out and like was able to visualize it, it was super helpful to me. Okay, so trying to push through this mental model, seeing if we can get there. Let's see. So if you were to have a bunch of miners mining this blockchain without proof of work, and miners could just solve, you know, it's kind of even hard to even say what they would be solving. If you could just have miners mine without any feedback for that to slow down, what you would get is just like runaway mining, right? And Bitcoin wouldn't be valuable. If miners could just get Bitcoins, you know, by producing more miners, if they could get more Bitcoin by just having more miners, it wouldn't really work, right? So all the blocks they'd come faster and faster and faster. They'd be close together. You'd have this rush of Bitcoins in the ecosystem, and it wouldn't be a valuable system. The way Bitcoin actually works is that it regulates the timing of these blocks, and that's what I want to try and explain here. So over lunch, when I was working at blockchain, the way that this was explained to me was through a toaster, and I thought this was a really good mental model to use. So you can think of your regular toaster, right? In your regular toaster, if you want to put some toast in there and get it a perfect golden brown color, you know it takes 15 seconds to get it this perfect golden brown color. And you can just do that every morning and you're fine. The problem and the limitation of your regular toaster is when you have a bagel and say now there's a new type of bread, say it's frozen, and now you have no idea how long you need to keep it in the toaster to produce the desired outcome of that perfectly golden brown bread, right? How are you going to achieve that end without a variance? So you're just going to have to do trial and error in order to get that desired output. So you're going to do it over and over and over again until you get it correct, right? You may burn one might be under toasted, you have to put it in again, until you come up with a more advanced toaster, which would have this color sensor. So what I'm introducing here is the concept of a feedback loop, right? But non-technical people, and myself included, when you don't have an engineering background, you may not have come into contact with this before, but really so many things are designed in this way. So with the toaster, instead of having to guess how long it would take to get that golden brown color, you just introduce a color sensor, and now it automatically knows, oh yeah, this is when we should stop, and it stops it, right? So this is the pattern of the control loop, right? You have an input, you have controls, and you have the feedback sensors and the output. The way Bitcoin utilizes this is the input is the total network hash rate, or basically all of the miners mining. The control is proof of work. The feedback sensor is this difficulty adjustment, which, you know, most people have heard of. And the goal is not just to produce a block, but it's to produce a block within 10 minutes of time. And that 10 minutes of time is crucial because that's what creates the clock, right? So it wouldn't be a productive clock. It wouldn't be an interesting system if it failed to produce blocks every 10 minutes. And miraculously, it does do that. And I think this is what makes Bitcoin so cool, is it's so complicated and it just works so well. So here's an example of network hash rate from 2016 and 2018. And you can see the input hash rates are dramatically more going up in the 2 years, and the 10-minute block time stays the same. So on average, 144 blocks are found in a day, and that makes 1,008 blocks found in a week. And that's give or take based on how many miners are in the network. And then there's a difficulty readjustment period after like 2016 blocks, but these numbers are sort of irrelevant to understanding the larger mental model. Yeah, so I explain most of the book kind of similar, you know, it's very much in that way. I do everything with mental models and no code. I talk about UTXOs as just value on the blockchain. I talk about transactions as a balanced transfer layer. I talk about blocks as the way that the system synchronizes state. I explain hashes in as simple as way as that I knew how. I explain how hashes actually create this unbreakable linked chain. I talk about hashes, how hashes are used in another way, which is actually as a measure of work in proof of work. I talk about mining. I think with mining, you hear multiple different mental models, and one of them is like, well, it's solving complex computer problems, which I think is a terrible way to explain it. So I explain it with dice instead. I won't get into that here because that's just a bit much. Let's see. I talk about you know, price fluctuations and things like that. I talk about peak hype, pit despair, all the sad people who only understand hype and they don't understand the technical aspects of Bitcoin. So they buy when it's peak hype and then they end up in the pit of despair. I talk about dollar cost averaging to some extent, and of course, decentralization, because that's the entire point. So yeah, I think I've ranted for long enough now. You can get the book if you're interested on Amazon. You can also get it on Goodreads. At least I'm doing a giveaway on there right now. And I put this all together in the form of a course, which is like a bunch of hours and goes super slow, way slower than the book, and goes in more depth too. And you can get that on my website. But yeah, I hope I was able to unfold that for you in a way that made some sense. And, you know, I had a really fun time writing the book. If you guys have any feedback on it or have any questions, let me know. I think I might write a sequel to it that'll be more about the expanded cryptocurrency industry and not just Bitcoin.
I gotta say, this perspective is really refreshing in this space. So thank you a lot, even for just like those components. I think just how you spoke about those components was super refreshing. So I'm super interested in how you talk about the rest of Bitcoin as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'll also add to that and say it's worth noting that it's much more difficult to get this type of balanced approach to this. Like it's hard to get interest around this to the same extent because so many people just love the hype. And then there's like, you know, the echo chamber of people who are all feeding off the hype. So I think it's more difficult to reach the audience I'm trying to reach, because I'd like to reach more of like the newer people into the space and then do it in a way that's balanced and not just like shill.
Yeah, well, I don't know if some of these people are new or not, but there were quite a few questions that came in via MeetUp that I already have on the side over here. If you have some time, if we can get through some of those questions, that'd be
absolutely cool. Hit me.
Somebody asked, actually referencing what you were just talking about for your sequel. So there was a question on what your sentiment is like for protocols other than Ethereum, for other protocols like Ethereum or Cosmos.
Yeah, I do come from a libertarian background, so I recall going to an Ethereum meetup, and I sort of tell the story all the time. But you know, I asked Vitalik like what is the cap of Ethereum before Ethereum had even launched, and he's like, well, there is no cap because that's a security flaw. And like I could talk about why he says it's a security flaw. Basically, in Bitcoin, we don't know what's going to happen when there's no longer a mining subsidy. Like the mining subsidy is sort of untested. We assume that it'll work, but in order for it to work, fees have to go up. And this is a point that I make in the book, because for fees to go up, it's like almost no one wants to say that because it's just unpopular. Like people want it to be free. That being said, going back to Ethereum, I have a hard time understanding Ethereum because of my economic background. Because I understand economics, it makes it more difficult to understand how Ethereum will work. At a technical level, I think Ethereum is also more complicated. I don't want to say too many negative things about it. I'm not like a maximalist like in any way, but yeah, that I'd have to get into it in order to actually answer that question properly, I think.
Yeah. It looks like Jack unmuted himself. Jack, did you have a question you wanted to ask over the call? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe we'll come back. All right. There was a question actually after that that ties directly back into that answer, which was, do you think Bitcoin maximalism helps or hurts the understanding of Bitcoin?
I think it hurts it. Maybe there was a time where that wasn't true, but I think now it definitely hurts it. You know, because there's a lot of stuff where it's like maximalists will say all these like horrible things about altcoins or potentially interesting projects, and then they will themselves go and try and start one of these potentially interesting projects and then claim that there's a lot of egos involved in the space now, which I think makes it worse.
There was a question asking about kind of Bitcoin itself, saying, how do you answer the question of, but what's backing it?
Oh yeah, that's actually a really good one. I think the question of what's backing it. So I use a quote. It's by Naval. I like lead every chapter with a quote, and his quote is, "Money is," I'm paraphrasing, but it's something along the lines of like, all money is this consensus hallucination. Now, I think that like the reason why gold is valuable is because we believe that the property of scarcity is valuable. And I think Bitcoin shares that same property without having to be gold, you know? So that's how I think of it. I think of like, what are the properties of gold that make it value? Okay, it's scarcity. What are the properties of Bitcoin that make it valuable? I think it's also scarcity in addition to a number of other things that gold doesn't have.
Do you agree with the sentiment? Like, I think it was the Winklevi who were also mentioning, oh, well, when we mine asteroids, gold supply will change.
I think that's just a joke, but I mean, I'm sure it could happen. Yeah. I think that's just a joke. I don't know if I agree with it or disagree with it. I think it's not in my lifetime, so I'm not worried about it.
Okay, cool.
Not in my kids' lifetime either. So
I think the context for that was that Elon is going to do it before we expected. Which, hey, whatever happens, I have no idea.
I think people believing that is probably really good for both Bitcoin and gold, but obviously.
Yeah. And the Winklevi are definitely in the business for that.
Yeah.
There was a question from Brian saying, what major changes happened after, I'm assuming what major changes happened in Bitcoin after you wrote the book that you wish you could have included in the book?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say there have been major changes. Like one of the things that's happening in develop right now is a lot of not development. Another way to put it is like in the early days of Bitcoin, there were things that you can do that would get you like 10 to 20% efficiency gains. And like, that's just not the case anymore. There's a lot of stuff in Bitcoin that could be implemented, but like everything just goes much slower. Everything goes much slower. So I cover SegWit to some small degree. I stopped myself from like going into how fees were calculated, but like, yeah, I had to choose, and I didn't think that was necessarily important. I didn't talk about Lightning in a great degree because like if I look at the landscape and the ecosystem of people who understand Bitcoin, people who are talking about it, most people who have heard of Bitcoin and like less than 1% of them have heard about Lightning. So yeah, if I were to do a sequel, I would talk more about Lightning and explain it and give it the same kind of work that I did with the rest of the system. Because I think Lightning is just, it's so complicated. It needs like its own book, probably.
Yeah. Are there a few people in the space who you look to for either inspiration or for, I don't know, for some insights on some of those components as well? I mean, like, who do you look to?
Yeah, I think inside of the space, I really appreciate the take of core devs mostly. That would be like Rusty, Peter, but then at the same time, my criticism towards them and it is kind of like, you know, one of my favorite events in the Bay Area is the Bitcoin Dev Meetup, but it's like only the other contributors ever understand like what's being said at that meetup. So, you know, it's not their job to make it understandable to other people because it's their job to be good cryptographers and like good developers. So yeah, that's who I would look up to in the space. But at the same time, I understand that it takes time to really understand what they're saying.
There's a question.
It may not be worth everyone's time.
Yeah. There was a question on Meetup from someone named Nick. He said, there are a lot of criticisms about Bitcoin. Do you have some criticism about Bitcoin that you'd like to share with us? And what is the greatest threat to Bitcoin?
Criticisms about Bitcoin. Yeah, I mean, criticisms about Bitcoin. There's so many criticisms. I mean, one of the ones that's coming to mind, because we just sort of talked about Ethereum to some small degree, is that it's not fast enough. That's one of the things that I think is interesting. Like I've been talking about people that I admire as well. The founder of Visa, D-Hawk, I believe is his name. And what he was trying to do with Visa mirrors in my mind, Bitcoin so much that it's weird that we put these two in competition with each other. So the criticisms against Bitcoin, one is that it goes too slow, and it's actually, that's a requirement of the system in order for it to work, as weird as that sounds. And it's probably too complicated to get into now, but it just has to do with fees, right? So if the system were to go faster, it wouldn't be scalable, at least in its current design. So like people who are trying to make blocks come faster, make fees lower, that's another criticism, that fees are too high. All of these things, both of those two things are actually why Bitcoin works. And I don't think competitors to Bitcoin that try and fix those things would actually end up working long term, unless you have some sort of constant subsidy. But then is the protocol valuable if you do that?
These bring up more questions than answers.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the thing is, like, we can sit and like pontificate about it, but you just need to experiment and try it and then see what the market will do. Right? Like we can't decide for the market.
Yeah, absolutely. I asked a question just for me. I'll throw this one in here.
Cool.
Like pre-Bitcoin, what did you think about the principles in Austrian economics? I mean, I hear from a lot of people, like they just thought it was fun, but didn't think it could ever become real pre-Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, I could criticize Austrian economics to some degree, and like I'm enough of an economics nerd that I've actually gone and tried to read like some of the more boring economists. So it's like one of the criticisms against Austrian economists is like, you know, it's just sort of like this do nothing approach to management of money, and people don't necessarily like that. Like, gosh, it's kind of hard to parse out here, but like basically the way that I view the Austrian school is that they were just advocating to do nothing in times where everyone else wanted to do something. It's like, well, we should just print more money, or we should stimulate the economy in some way. And the Austrians were like, well, that could be dangerous. And like, yes, that's true. But like, as long as you have systems that are controllable, humans will try to control them. So it's like, we needed a system that could not be controlled. We didn't need an argument about why control would fail. Right. And that's kind of what the Austrians do, is they just say like, this control is going to end badly. And like, yeah, it will, but like people are going to try anyway, because like there was a Great Depression. That, yeah, small rant.
Do you have someone, do you have like a favorite economist?
Yeah, my favorite economist, let's see if I can even say his name. He wrote maybe someone in this room knows, the petition of the candle makers or whatever. Let's see.
It's not Bastiat.
I believe it might be, yeah.
Okay, so it is Frederick Bastiat. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say Paul Krugman.
Yeah, there you go. It's Bastiat. I really like stories like that. Kind of goes back to my mental models way of thinking about that. I think he does a really good job.
He's awesome.
Yeah.
There was also a question from MeetUp. It says, do you have a favorite effect or component of Bitcoin?
Favorite effect or component? Maybe my favorite effect is the transfer of monetary power to more libertarian minded people, like people who aren't interested in power and control to the same extent. Like the early investors in Bitcoin really, like, as nerdy as those people were, a lot of them were very ideological about like, haha, this probably won't work, but it's really cool. And like, I support it. You know, a lot of the early developers thought that way. And then those people ended up becoming really wealthy, right? Or, you know, or they got their monies lost or stolen or something like that, or they spent it. But I think rewarding those people is the best outcome that we've had out of Bitcoin, is the type of people who have made money off of it. That's probably not going to be true in the subsequent hype cycles, but it was definitely true in the beginning. And then they all sold at 100.
Oh, well, yeah. Is that a common question you get, like, or a common statement you hear from people that, oh, well, you know, if I was just one of the people who purchased early and, you know, by now I'd be rich. How do you answer those people, or do you say anything?
I think it's something that people say in their heads when they it's like a wishful thinking sort of thing. They're wish worshippers. Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible for anyone to think like that, but it's not a healthy way to think. The reverse of that is like, I bought in super early, not me personally, but you know, people who did, they buy in super early and then they wish they had not sold, but then they did. You know, but it's really hard to not sell when you had 10Xs. It's like, yeah, it's like people didn't think it was going to be as successful as it already is.
Hey, Jabron. Our guy last week that was on, I think he had a great answer to that. He's all, you know, if you were here early to the space, there's a good chance you either lost it, had it stolen through a scam, or lost, you know, and there's just so many ways. I have a buddy who was in the space earlier, you know, split 100 Bitcoin pot poker, and it's like he doesn't have any of that anymore. It's like he earned it in an ICO for some other token at some point, you know, and this and that. And it's just, you know, there's a few out there, but not many.
Yeah, there's like a guy at the company that I work for too, who's just like legendary for having like hundreds of Bitcoins stolen from him, and like over like an insecure Wi-Fi moment, and it was like one of the top posts on like Bitcoin Talk or something like that. So, yeah. I mean, I'm sure if you wanted to feel like shit, you could definitely reflect on that for the rest of your life. But like, why live your life that way?
Yeah, there was a question here in the chat from Geo. They say, what are you ultimately trying to solve with crypto that you cannot solve with traditional policies? An economic system is reflexive in nature, including believing in the do-nothing approach.
Yeah, well, the problem with the do nothing approach is that it relies on the right character that's capable and willing to do nothing. So I think the best part about crypto is building systems that exist outside of individual control, outside of group control. So you just build the properties of the system, you buy into the properties of the system, and the system does not change. That's what I think is unique about cryptocurrency. Although, of course, as we know, many cryptocurrencies do change. So watch out for that.
Yeah. There was a question from MeetUp from Sean. He says, when will it be easy for normal people to operate cold storage with confidence?
Maybe never. It's not an optimistic viewpoint, but I mean, like, again, working with a lot of the cypherpunks, one of the funny things that would happen in the office was just like, the security people just showing me how you could basically break every hardware wallet. Like, it doesn't exactly instill confidence. Like, basically the risks of a hardware wallet is if anyone has it physically in their presence, like that would be a risk. Obviously they would need to know what they were doing. So I think the risk is still a lot lower than say like a gold bar where just like anyone could, any idiot could just pick it up and run with it. But yeah, I mean, when can someone, the part of the problem with the analytical thinking approach, which is just like pervasive in all of tech, not just like cryptocurrency, is that like all of these tools are built for like the hyper nerd, right? They don't have any user experience, and user experience isn't valued. Like if you tell people who make these products that you value user experience, they'll just like tell you like to like basically fuck off in any direction because like it's not a high priority and they have like other problems. Another thing that's really funny in the security space is like you can actually report, vulnerabilities in wallets, not just hardware wallets, but all wallets. And most it's probably the standard that people just ignore the reports that are sent to them, and they'll even defend them and say, well, that's not really a bug, until the media blows it up. And then they're like, oh, we're working on that right away. So yeah, I mean, if you're using a hardware wallet is good, the UX is bad, but but that's just what people have to deal with. And then you have to like also put it behind a safe probably.
Can you call out some wallets or anybody that you think is not up to standards?
I like to praise specifically and criticize generally. So like, I don't want to, but I mean, like, talking about wallet vulnerabilities is a fun one. Like there's more than one wallet, I'll say, that has had the dependency hack. So it's like people normally think that open source wallets are more secure, but in reality, because the code is open source, people can see exactly what dependencies they're relying on. Someone becomes the maintainer of a dependency, they inject malware into the dependency, and then wallets are hacked that way. And that's happened to more than 2 wallets that I can think of. So I would recommend the Ledger though. I think the Ledger is probably the best out of all the options.
Nice. We got some thumbs up in the chat there.
Yeah, I think that's an easy one.
David asks, do you think Bitcoin has become gold 2.0 versus a currency which it was intended for?
Gold 2.0. See, the problem with that question is as it was intended for. I think it was intended to solve the double spend problem, and it did do that. I think Satoshi's branding problem, as he said digital cash instead of digital gold, I think the reason why Satoshi as a cypherpunk said cash was because what cypherpunks were trying to do is they were trying to recreate the ability to pass cash back and forth between participants online, which is not what you do with gold. So I think that was just, I don't think it was ever meant to be like cash. I think it was really meant to be more like gold. But the term cash made more sense in the context of talking to cypherpunks at the time.
We'll wrap up with a few more questions. If you have a question, you can leave it in the chat. Also, if you'd like to ask one over the call, then just add an emoji and I'll call on you and we'll make sure that you get unmuted so you can ask it yourself. Otherwise, one question that is super serious that I'd like to ask is, do you think working in the space ages you faster than other industries?
I mean, other industries. Yeah, there's probably some amount of burnout there. I mean, yes. It's hard to get high on the hopium when you work in the industry sometimes.
Does it get, is it always exciting? Or I mean, as exciting as it can be, or do you feel sometimes it's just a mess? I think some of us sometimes feel like it's just all chaos.
I feel like it's a super mess, but I also realize that this is probably true in many other industries. Like one of the things that, you make this is a problem that's unique to crypto as opposed to other industries, but it's like, if you make a hypothesis about how this like new cryptographic chocolate is going to like revolutionize the space, right? And then you spend the 3 years it takes to implement that. And then it turns out the industry has totally moved on and is not interested in that particular thing. I can definitely see how that's demoralizing to like work on something for 3 years and then just be like, actually, that's not interesting in the space anymore. So to me, I'm most interested in things that like preserve privacy, and that's not really where the mainstream part of the movement is going, right? It's like tokens and like, it's all this like 10x stuff. But I think the long-term gain is in the actual protocols that are really innovating more than what Bitcoin can offer.
Do you have like a sentiment you could share about one of the more popular trends recently, which is the open finance space on Ethereum?
I don't even know that I follow the open finance space in Ethereum. I think I've pretty much tuned out to tokens, DeFi, because from my understanding of it, like there's just not the user base that it claims to have. I explained this in the book, but it's like, if a project only has like 500 users, it doesn't make sense to me how it's getting so much funding. Maybe you guys are more knowledgeable on DeFi, because it's like like I said, I've totally tuned down to it. But yeah, I don't know. I just haven't put any thought into it because I haven't been able to find one that was interesting. I think the privacy coins are interesting to me. And it would also be a fair point to say that it would take me so long to truly understand these systems that for me, it feels difficult to have enough time to do that. Like, I don't know if you guys remember with the, it was like the big hack that happened on Ethereum, where it was like they weren't using the term DeFi back then. What was the term? The DAO, yeah, the original DAO. And like, I remember everyone talking about it at a conference, and I was with this woman who like had her baby with her, and we were all watching this conference. She comes into play, but like, I didn't know anyone who had personally security reviewed the code, right? I didn't know anyone. And I thought that's a little bit odd. And then when the hack happened, I saw that the only person, like they said it in a blog post, the only person who had done a security review was that woman in the conference who was with her kid. And I was like, the only person who actually was competent enough to do the security review at the organization is someone with a baby. And I'm not like, it was mind blowing to me that it was so long. It was such a long contract that there was no one who could actually read the whole thing, right? And I mean, the vulnerability that was exploited there was known and was published in like a previous blog post and this whole thing. So for my mental sanity, I've had to tune a lot of this stuff out because it ends up just being the pattern is there. It's always the same sort of thing.
We have a couple questions to kind of round it out. What the second to last is, was there something that surprised you after the book was released, when people started giving you their feedback? What was reception like? Did you find that this had an effect on people you were not expecting?
No, I wouldn't say there's an effect I don't think that. Maybe taking the question in a different route. I think the reason I wrote the book is because of the effect that the industry was having on people. Like, I had people come up to me at bars, because I just like wear Bitcoin shirts and stuff. They would tell me they sold their house to buy Ethereum. And like, I was just seeing crazy shit. And like, granted, I lived in the Bay Area, and like, everyone just had a story about how they were a genius because they could ride the bull market, right? And I was like, dude, this is nuts. Like, and that was sort of one of the motivating factors for writing the book. I think the feedback that I've gotten from people who have read it has mostly been what I've expected. Like, I wanted people to be able to like visualize the system, and I think that's what people get out of it when they read it.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm definitely going to be buying the book. I haven't read it yet, but based off of what we've been hearing from you today, I'm pretty excited to read this.
Cool.
Last question from here is, what are you looking forward to most when you look at the future of Bitcoin? Is there something you're just super excited about?
Super excited about. Yeah, I mean, I guess I actually have more fear than excitement around this. I think the biggest win for Bitcoin ends up being like really bad news for the rest of the economy. Like, in my mind, I see a lot of, especially people like I know, like all my friends are Bitcoiners, to be honest, at this point. I live in Texas now, and like, I see people cheering on, Bitcoin doing really well. And if Bitcoin ever gets to those all-time highs that we never thought even possible, things that I wouldn't say because it just sounds so idiotic to say. If those things end up happening, which would be great for me and everyone I know personally, it would be devastating for whatever event caused that, right? So we're talking like if fiat ever, if the world's reserve currency in the dollar ever has massive problems to the extent that Bitcoin's worth $100,000 a coin, I think that we would have bigger problems than we could actually imagine. So I'm not excited about that, but I'm simultaneously am excited about that, which makes me semi a bad person. So
Well, I think that is an awesome answer, and I think that's the perfect answer to end off on. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate, I especially really appreciate you being here. There's already thank yous coming into the chat. I'm going to add your Twitter link in the chat box below. Is it the best way for people to kind of follow you and get in touch?
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. Awesome.
And I'll answer any questions on there too. I'm on Twitter too.
Well, also, I think the last question is exactly where should people buy the book so that the author gets the most money?
You should buy it off Amazon. And if you could do a review on Amazon, that helps too. Amazon does a thing where they like to have the reviews on there be qualified. So they like it if a verified purchaser is the one who's making the review. So that helps me out a lot.
Gotcha. So go ahead and buy it at Amazon. Well, Kiara, thank you very, very much. Everybody, I highly recommend reading the book just to get a deeper understanding of what Bitcoin is all about, because she does a really great job explaining it. And yeah, I really liked how it's not hype, but it's not all technical. It's just like right in between, which is like really kind of what fascinates me about the field. And I think a lot of folks that come to the Bitcoin meetup, it's just not all like, oh, buy this coin, but it's not all just like, okay, oh yeah, have the semicolon be here and all the technical coding stuff. So, thank you very much for coming. So what we like to do at the very end of the meetup is we like to open the floor and be a little bit decentralized. So anybody that wants to say anything about anything, you can have 1 minute to chat now, or you get to forever hold your peace.
Hey, this is Jack. Kiara, I just want to say thank you. I ended up buying the book on Amazon while you were talking, so that's really good. I'm looking forward to it. The one thing I would just add a little bit, and I can put it in the chat link. I haven't done it yet, but I will. When I'm talking to people and they are talking about Bitcoin and all that, the first thing I try to do is to find what their relationship is to one fiat currency. They even understand that. And then second, what is their relationship to money? And I found this website, which I'll put in the chat, called What is Money by a guy named Evan. And it's really, really amazing. And I've read it multiple times and tried to get my niece and nephews to read it, because it really puts not only the Bitcoin world, but just before you even get to Bitcoin, it puts the concept of money out there in a really easily understandable and digestible way. So I'll go ahead and add that to the chat if anybody's interested. But thank you again. I'm looking forward to reading the book.
Okay, thanks. I'll read that book too. That sounds great.
Cool, Jack. Oh, and Jack, you got to hop into the Discord because we need all that. We need all your knowledge popping into our Discord group. David, can you post the link? Yeah, David posted the link to the Discord up top there. So
right. I tried to go in, and I got in, but it said my account wasn't claimed, and then I went and tried to claim it, and then it said it's like that email address has already been used. So maybe offline I can work with you guys. And
David, can you help Jack get in our Discord, and then anybody else go ahead and click the Discord link there.
The Discord didn't work?
No, it worked. I'm just having an error. We can solve it offline.
Yeah. Jack's having some technical errors. So yeah, Jack and David, if you guys can connect via the text there. So anybody else have 1 minute to chat? Or forever hold your peace. And by forever, I mean until our next meetup 2 weeks from now. Speaking of our meetup from 2 weeks from now, Joe, who do we have?
I think Joe just had to leave for a moment. Just join if you're following our meetup organizations. If you're following Starfish SF, SF Bitcoin, Blockchain Social, or Sacramento Bitcoin Meetup, you will get a notification about the next meetup. Make sure to follow all of those, and and we'll keep you updated there.
I believe it's someone from Chain Analysis, actually, who might be the company trying to break Monero, but we shall see about that. So anybody else have anything to say? If not, we will continue the conversation in the Discord. Hopefully, if Jack can figure out his technical difficulties, he'll be there as well. David figured that out. And yeah, everybody, we do these meetups every second and fourth Monday of the month, and they're going to be online for the foreseeable future, although eventually I'll start inviting people over to my house if they bring some hard cider, and that should be good. Gibran, am I forgetting anything?
No, I think that's all. Be safe, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you again, Kiara, for being here. Follow her on Twitter.
Oh, and Kiara, if you want to go and if you need any recommendations for being speakers at any other groups, please let us know. Maybe you could do it down at San Diego, or the Bitcoin and booze one that David chatted about. Oh, David, I've been going to that, by the way. That's the Bitcoin.
Are you guys live streaming that one? How is that one working?
Well, we don't run it.
But when you go to it, is it like Zoom and you guys are drinking?
Yeah, well, it's like Zoom, except for like they're a venture capital firm, so they bought like something that's like better than Zoom. David, if you could put the link to the Bitcoin and booze thing, I think they do it once every Tuesday, and they're blockchain. Blockchainbooze.io, and yeah, they're always looking for speakers over there.
Well, I'll message you.
And we want to grab them, and we want to have their speaker come talk over us. So maybe if David can make that happen. So yeah, next time is chain analysis, and there's going to be some interesting talks there. And all right, everybody, I would try to keep the meeting about an hour and a half. So thank you very much, and we continue it as always on Discord. And most importantly, don't forget to buy Bitcoin Clarity. Oh, and I'm assuming the tulip, it's blurry on one side and clear on the other because it's the dichotomy between how to explain Bitcoin. Is that what it is?
You know, I should probably do a little primer on why I did that, but yeah, that was the concept behind it. Also,
Yeah.
I was originally going to call it Bitcoin, the Value of Beauty, and I just thought tulips were pretty. And
Oh, I thought it had to do with the tulip mania
it does, but I should probably make it more clear that it's like, obviously it's not like tulip mania.
Oh, okay.
Like, obviously it's clearly different than tulip mania.
Gotcha. All right. Well, there will be some mania coming back in 2 weeks. Sacramento Bitcoin cryptocurrency group mania. We shall be back, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks.